The movie begins with an elderly woman named Helga who suffers from dementia, sitting in her dimly lit apartment, knitting. As she works, she suddenly hears strange, disturbing sounds echoing through the walls. Frantically, she picks up the phone with trembling hands and calls an exterminator. Meanwhile, outside the building, a maintenance worker named Frank spots the Bug Brothers extermination truck and contacts Helga to unlock the door. Frank is furious, questioning why she contacted an external service instead of relying on him. Helga explains the strange noises she's been hearing, prompting Frank to investigate. As he steps into the room, he discovers a scene of horror, blood everywhere, and the exterminator is badly injured. In a sudden twist, Frank is violently pulled towards the air vents. Helga, lingering just outside the room, gets momentarily distracted by a commercial on the TV. Her dementia causes her to forget the gruesome scene entirely. Moments later, the unsettling noises return, and Helga once again reaches out to an exterminator. The scene then rewinds 4 days, revealing an asteroid crashing through a window and landing inside a dollhouse in an apartment. From this asteroid, a tiny spider emerges. A girl named Charlotte is navigating through the air vent into the room. She approaches the dollhouse, takes pictures of the dolls, and captions them as her next targets. As she observes a small spider crawling on her hand, she suddenly hears someone approaching. In a hurry, she hides the spider in a matchstick box and sneaks back to her room through the air vents. The apartment she had intruded on belonged to an elderly lady named Gunther. Upon noticing her broken window, Gunther rushes upstairs to inform Ethan, Charlotte's stepfather, about the intrusion. She complains about Charlotte breaking into her apartment once again. Charlotte takes out the spider from the matchstick box, places it in a glass jar, and names it Sting. Ethan confronts Charlotte, who quickly denies the accusation, claiming she has been in her room all morning. Ethan is a comic book writer who also takes care of small maintenance tasks in the building as the building representative. Heather, his wife, runs a small business, and their daughter Charlotte, inspired by Ethan, has taken up sketching. Charlotte's life has been complicated. Her biological father left her and her mother, Heather, to live with his girlfriend in Thailand. Heather later met and married Ethan, and they had a son named Liam. Ethan legally adopted Charlotte and always treated her as his daughter. However, Charlotte struggled to accept him as her father and always addressed him by his first name. Later that day, Charlotte feeds a bug to her pet spider, Sting, who devours it and immediately grows larger. Fascinated, she tries to identify Sting's species, but finds nothing in her research. Every time she feeds him, he doubles in size within hours. Ethan went to the basement to shred and remove things that they don't use, and then he went back to his house to take care of his kid. Meanwhile, Heather went to visit Helga. She is Heather's mother and Charlotte's grandmother. Gunther, Helga's sister and Heather's aunt, also lives with them. Due to her dementia, Helga doesn't remember Heather as her daughter. Helga told her she knitted a sweater for Charlotte as a gesture of gratitude, but Charlotte disliked it because of the strong mothball odor. At the house, Ethan called Charlotte to show her the comic book drawing he was working on, and they started working together. Heather then came and greeted them. Ethan went to Charlotte's room and saw the drawing of a spider. Charlotte came and called him an intruder jokingly. He complimented her sketch and asked her to help him with the new book he was working on. As Sting continues to grow, he eventually escapes from his jar one night and sneaks into Helga's apartment through the air vents, where he eats her pet parrot. The next morning, Gunther discovers the parrot's remains and screams in horror. Ethan rushes to Helga's apartment. Upon hearing the commotion, he calls Frank, the exterminator from the beginning of the movie. Frank examines the parrot's cage and concludes that a small creature was responsible. He notices a sticky, gooey substance in the air vents and decides to spray gas inside them. When Charlotte accidentally drops a mothball while feeding Sting, it terrifies the spider and causes him to scurry away. The mothball also burns through Sting's web. Frank proceeds to fumigate all the apartments in the building. When he reaches Charlotte's room, she refuses to let him in, explaining that her pet Sting won't like it, and shows Frank her now enormous spider. Frank warns her that spiders are not meant to be pets. They are instinctual hunters, capable only of killing and eating. That night, Charlotte fed Sting, and she noticed that Sting had grown even larger. Later that night, Sting escapes from the jar once more, venturing into the apartment of a Spanish woman named Maria, who lives alone after her divorce. Maria is passed out on the couch when her dog Bonnie starts barking at noises coming from the air vents. Maria wakes up, goes to the kitchen to take her antidepressants, and becomes emotional while looking at a family photo. In this vulnerable moment, Sting attacks her, injecting his venom and paralyzing her. The spider then crawls into her mouth and begins to consume her from the inside. Charlotte went to a neighbor named Eric, who lives 2 floors down. Eric is a zoologist. Charlotte demonstrates how Sting feeds and grows in size. He asks Charlotte to leave Sting with him for a few days so he can study the spider. The following morning, Ethan hears strange noises coming from the air vents. When he opens the vent, he finds Bonnie inside. He takes Bonnie to Maria's apartment to return her, but is horrified to discover Maria's lifeless body. Terrified, he calls the police. The officers suspect suicide given Maria's history of depression. Ethan, however, is deeply unsettled by the condition of her body and senses something far more sinister. As Ethan is talking with the officer, Eric calls Ethan and informs him about Sting. Eric told him that he didn't know what kind of spider Ethan was and that it could be fatal. Ethan, concerned for everyone's safety, decides that Sting should be sent to the health department. Eric agrees, offering to handle the process himself, given his connections there. After returning to his apartment, Ethan confronts Charlotte, furious that she kept a potentially dangerous spider hidden, endangering Liam. He informs her that he has sent the spider away, prompting Charlotte to erupt in anger. She expresses her longing to be with her biological father in Thailand. Ethan, trying to calm her, reveals that her father returned from Thailand 6 months ago and hasn't attempted to contact Heather or her. This revelation devastates Charlotte, who storms off to her room in tears. Heather, upset with Ethan for telling Charlotte about her father, follows her to comfort her. Meanwhile, Eric, who had deceived Ethan about sending Sting to the health department, had actually kept Sting, and now it has gotten bigger. One night, Sting breaks free from the glass cage and crawls into the air vents. Gunter notices that her cat is missing and starts searching for it. She then hears noises coming from the vents and opens it to retrieve her cat. As she was halfway in the vent, she was swiftly taken by Sting. Back at Ethan's apartment, tensions are high. Ethan feels overwhelmed by job pressures and the strain on his family relationships. While trying to fix the TV, his frustration boils over and he accidentally breaks it. Heather sends Charlotte, Liam, and their dog Bonnie to Charlotte's room while she confronts Ethan. Charlotte, trying to drown out the argument, puts on headphones and watches a drama. Heather spots Sting on the ceiling and screams, but it's too late. Sting attacks both Ethan and Heather, paralyzing them with its venom. Charlotte, oblivious to her headphones, steps out to feed Bonnie and doesn't notice Sting dragging her parents away. However, Bonnie's incessant barking leads her to investigate. Seeing the chaotic state of the living room and the open-air duct, Charlotte panics. Sting emerges, and in a desperate attempt to protect herself, she blocks the vent with a shelf and starts screaming. Sting, unable to push the shelf, retreats through the air vents and takes Liam from Charlotte's room. Furious and determined to save her brother, Charlotte recalls how Sting was frightened by mothballs. She dons her grandmother's sweater, saturated with the scent of mothballs. Charlotte takes mothballs from Helga's kitchen, grinds them into a fine powder, and fills a toy gun with the mixture. She also carries extra bottles of the concoction with her. She asks Helga if she has noticed anything unusual. Helga, confused, mentions seeing a large black dog that seemed scared of her when she tried to pet it. Realizing the significance of the mothball scent, Charlotte tells Helga to keep her clothes on and to call the police. Armed with her plan, Charlotte steels herself for a confrontation with Sting, ready to use his fear against him and rescue her brother. Charlotte sets off to find Ethan, who was trapped in an air vent alongside Gunter, both encased in Sting's web. Ethan, attempting to free himself, ends up burning his hands on the web. Meanwhile, Charlotte arrives at Eric's apartment, where she is horrified by the bloodshed of the animals and realizes that Eric has been feeding Sting. She finds Eric stuck to the ceiling, covered in webs. Frightened, she calls out for Ethan and hears his muffled response from the air vents. She opens the vent and finds Ethan. She informs him of her plan to use mothball water to burn the web, instructing him to hold on to some hooks to avoid falling. Ethan agrees, and Charlotte frees him. However, as Sting approaches, they both tumble down the air vents and land in a garbage can. Trapped in the garbage can, Charlotte is targeted by Sting. Ethan Ethan sprays the spider with the mothball water, causing it to retreat. The scene then circles back to the opening scene where Helga calls an exterminator, and Frank arrives at her apartment, arguing about the Bug Brothers. Frank ends up falling into the garbage can with Ethan and Charlotte and immediately starts blaming Charlotte for the situation. When Sting returns, Ethan uses the last of the mothball water to fend him off. Frank tries to grab another bottle from Ethan, but Ethan refuses, knowing it's their last defense. Suddenly the sprinklers activate, washing away the mothball water and leaving them vulnerable. Frank draws his electric gun to fight Sting, but Sting kills him in retaliation. Charlotte and Ethan, their hearts pounding, make a desperate run to the waste incinerator, planning to use it to kill Sting. Inside, they find Liam and Heather trapped in thick, sticky webs. Charlotte quickly burns the webs with the mothball mixture, freeing them both as they gasp for air. As Sting approaches with deadly intent, Ethan frantically tries to activate the incinerator, only to discover it won't work due to an unplugged power cord. With time running out, Ethan scrambles to plug it back in, while Charlotte, with fierce determination, blocks Sting's path using a large metal piece. Sting relentlessly breaks through, inching closer to them, but in a final desperate move, Charlotte manages to press the remote just in time. The incinerator roars to life, compressing Sting to death. Heather pulls Ethan out of the incinerator and administers CPR, reviving him. Overjoyed, Charlotte finally calls him Dad for the first time, bringing tears to Ethan's eyes. The family shares a heartfelt hug, their relief and love palpable. In the final scene, the camera pans, revealing thousands of Sting's eggs beginning to hatch. The eerie sight of the hatching eggs leaves the story on a chilling note. And with that, the movie ends. We hope you enjoyed our recap. Watch our next videos on the screen, and don't forget to subscribe for more amazing recaps. See you on the next one.